Hello, my name is Stephen Beekner. I am the president of the Colorado chapter of the American Water Resources Association. And it's my pleasure to be with you today. Well, I don't know if it's a good morning or a good afternoon where this is being recorded. And I'll get into why we don't know exactly when this is being shown, but it's my pleasure to be accompanied by numerous knowledgeable and experienced professionals in the area of water resources. And I'm excited to ask them some questions and hear their responses. Like I said, I'm with AWRA Colorado. The panel you're about to see was developed across multiple states. We have the state of Washington, Montana, and Idaho are also participating. And we have collaborated to produce we've asked a number of professionals in our states to answer some hopefully not too tough, but some tough questions about water resource planning and management. And we're excited to bring that to all of our different state sections across this Western United States conglomerate of sections that have participated. I came up with this idea to bring states together amidst our virtual environment. We all are probably done with Zoom calls, but here we are yet on another Zoom call. So I appreciate everybody taking advantage of the fact that we can connect rather seamlessly across hundreds, if not thousands of miles. So with that, I'm going to call on our different panelists to introduce themselves. And I appreciate that everybody here watching this recording, whether it's at over dinner or a happy hour, or perhaps during a conference or symposium, you all get to enjoy their responses in different manners. So if you'll pay attention and welcome with a virtual round of applause, welcome our speakers. I'll go ahead and first I'll kick it to Brian Patton with state of Idaho.
Yes, Stephen. My name is Brian Patton. I am the executive officer for the Idaho Water Resource Board in the state of Idaho.
Okay, and Tracy?
Hey, Stephen. I'm Tracy Kozloff, Deputy State Engineer at the Colorado Division of Water Resources.
Melissa?
Hi, everyone. I am Melissa Shar. I am the Hydroscience Manager for the Water Resources Division of the Montana Department of Natural Resources and Conservation.
And Mary?
Hello, Stephen. I'm Mary Verner. I'm the Water Resources Program Manager for the State of Washington Department of Ecology.
Wonderful. We have, through the different state sections that help participate, we've developed a number of questions that we're excited to ask you. We're going to start with, I'll share this question and read it aloud here. Please briefly describe the framework of your agency or department and the authority granted to your department to enforce particular aspects of water law or policy in your state. Why don't we go in reverse order? Mary, do you want to go ahead and start by providing your answer to that question?
Yes, Stephen. So in Washington State, the Water Resources Program is one of the environmental programs of the State Department of Ecology. Our Director of Ecology is in the Executive Cabinet reporting to our governor. Among our other environmental programs, for example, are the Water Quality Program, which addresses water quality standards. Water Resources, on the other hand, addresses water rights management, water supply availability, policy and planning around water, as well as dams and wells. And then there are other environmental programs such as toxic cleanup and site remediation, and the full suite of environmental programs in our agency.
Great. Melissa?
Sure. So Montana is divided into two separate agencies when it comes in terms of water. You have the Montana DEQ, which deals with water quality. And then you have the Montana DNRC, which is the organization I'm with, which is responsible for the development, conservation, and stewardship of our water resources. And there's and land resources as well. We have 4 divisions: water resources, state trust lands, forestry, and conservation and resource development. We also have 9 boards that are attached to our department. One of them is the Board of Oil and Gas, for example. And the Water Resources Division is responsible for promoting and coordinating beneficial use, conservation, protection, and development of our water resources. The Water Resource Division, we're divided into 8 regional offices across the state. Montana's a big state. And we have 5 bureaus that are centralized in Helena. So that includes our state water projects, which are dams, water operations, water rights is also housed in our Water Resource Division, water adjudication, and Montana is not fully adjudicated, and Water Management Bureau. I'm a hydroscience manager in the Water Management Bureau, and we support the administration of the Montana Use Act and the implementation of the 2015 Montana Water Use Plan. We do a lot of hydrologic investigations, resource planning. We have water planners in our bureau. We provide commissioner and water measurement trainings, technical support to the other bureaus, including water rights. And we support development and policy and rules and regulations. The Water Resource Division we are in statute, and we do administer portions of the Water Use Act that relate to anything after June 30th, 1973. And we do also provide technical assistance to the Water Court on historical water claims prior to 1973, and we maintain the Central Water Rights Record System. We do not have enforcement capabilities. The district court, in collaboration with the Water Court, manages the enforcement of water rights within the state of Montana.
Great, thank you. Tracy, why don't you take a shot?
All right, thanks, Stephen. In Colorado, we do also have several agencies that deal with water. At the Division of Water Resources, we're primarily focused on water quantity alone. And so DWR administers surface water rights and groundwater rights. We also issue well permits. We follow a priority system of Seniors First in Colorado. The Division of Water Resources also has a few more charges: the safety of dams and safety of water well construction, managing records of water diversion and other records like stream flows. But that's a pretty good summary of what the Division of Water Resources does. And then we also have a Colorado Water Conservation Board. It's part of our Department of Natural Resources, just like the Division of Water Resources. And the Water Conservation Board is primarily focused on planning, long-term planning. They do have a water rights nexus in terms of their environmental flow program that we call the in-stream flow program here in Colorado. We have also a state health department that deals with matters of water quality. And lastly, we have a system of 7 water courts in the state of Colorado, and they adjudicate water rights.
Great. And Brian, if you would tell
Yes,
my thoughts about Idaho's structure.
Sure. I'd like to share a screen if I could.
Please.
Okay. Okay, so this is just a brief overview of the responsibilities and the split of responsibilities between the director of the Department of Water Resources and the Idaho Water Resource Board. So executive officer for the Idaho Water Resource Board. The board's members are appointed by the governor. They must be approved by the state Senate. They must be balanced geographically and politically and experienced in water resource matters. The board's primary role is to plan for Idaho's future water needs and then carry out projects and programs to meet those needs. Those projects and programs range, and it includes a lot of what I call problem solving. Those projects and programs range from implementation of minimum in-stream flows to working on building new storage reservoirs, aquifer recharge programs, cloud seeding programs around the state, negotiations with water users in various basins, a lot of that type of problem solving work so that we can manage our water resources on into the future. The director's role, on the other hand, he's also appointed, the director is also appointed by the governor and must be approved by the Senate, and must have certain professional licensure and experience requirements. Currently, the director must be a licensed professional engineer or professional geologist with lots of years of experience in water resources. So the director's role is really everything having to do with water rights. So the director issues water rights, transfers water rights, makes sure that the right amount of water gets put into each canal, pump station, head gate, et cetera, according to those water rights through on the ground water masters on each river system. And then the director also oversees some additional regulatory functions such as dam safety, well drilling construction, and a few others. And then the director and the board share a common staff. One thing of note is that the board doesn't report to the director does not report to the board. They are both appointed by the governor. So they have to figure out a way to get along with each other and live together and manage their common staff. They have, as you can see, different responsibilities laid out. This is a combination of both constitutional authority and statutory authority. For example, Idaho's prior appropriation water rights system is enshrined in Constitution. The board also has some responsibilities enshrined in the state constitution. Much of what both the board and the director do are laid out in statute. And then water quality functions are housed at the Department of Environmental Quality. That is a very kind of a brief overview of how Idaho's laid out, and I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Terrific, thank you. As you all can tell, there is a wealth of experience and knowledge between the, I'm sorry, that's fair. Trying to share the next question. As I was saying, there's a wealth of experience and knowledge amongst the panelists here, and I'm grateful to have everybody present today. Thank you for providing a background on what you do. Our next question, we're going to start getting into, and a couple of you already mentioned it, the difficulty in balancing relationships between various aspects of perhaps agencies and programs, perhaps groundwater, surface water. I'm going to stop talking and let you guys answer this next question. Part of a broader question: what efforts are your state undertaking to address statewide water supply planning? More specifically, we have a number of sub-questions. First one being, how does your state law treat surface water and groundwater conjunctive management? Let's go back in reverse order. And Brian, do you want to start by answering that question? And you're muted there.
Thank you. I apologize for that. Yes, Idaho law very clearly has gone down the conjunctive administration of groundwater and surface water rights. That's been the subject of many administrative processes, many court decisions going to the state Supreme Court and back many times. And in fact, the state has been embroiled in that very question, deal with that very question for perhaps 2 decades. And I've spent much of my career trying to find, solutions to some of those problems, from the water board side. So Idaho law recognizes the interconnectedness, and it allows those who have senior surface water rights that might be impacted, or they believe they're injured by the pumping of junior groundwater rights, to make delivery calls against those junior groundwater rights. As you can imagine, that seems simple in practice, very difficult to implement. Hence a lot of those court decisions, a lot of money spent on litigation, a lot of money spent on groundwater modeling. And, recently, at least with our biggest aquifer and connected river situation, we've reached a settlement agreement that involves solutions on the part of the groundwater users and the state jointly, undertaking an aquifer management program.
Okay. Tracy, you want to answer?
All right, sure. In Colorado, similar to Idaho, statute recognizes that surface water and groundwater are connected. And so we administer surface water and groundwater holistically within this same system. So we deal with surface and groundwater both within the priority system. And with that, wells are generally much more junior than our surface water rights, and those surface water rights tend to date back to the mid 1800s, 1850s, 1860s, and so on. And wells tend to be much more junior, maybe they're 1950 all the way through present day. And so they tend to be junior, and they would injure surface water rights quite regularly if we didn't have a way to deal with them. And in Colorado, the way that we have developed to deal with this surface and groundwater interaction is through something called an augmentation plan. And an augmentation plan is a statutory tool where we're going to look at the impacts of well pumping, time, place, and amount on the surface water system, on the stream system. We're going to have lagged impacts, meaning when you pump a well today, it's going to take a while for the stream system to notice the withdrawal of water. And so our augmentation plans are going to look at the delay and timing from well pumping, and they require replacement water to be put back into that stream with the appropriate time, location, and amount whenever there's not enough water to make the other water users whole. So our augmentation plans are ways to keep the system whole. We also have something where the system basically operates in reverse, where water users may take surface water under a water right for recharge, put water into recharge into the stream alluvium, and determine the timing for when that water will then appear in the surface water stream, and they can use that for beneficial use. And sometimes that's used to offset the well pumping when the timing, location, and amount are all correct. So that's how that works in Colorado.
Great. Melissa?
Hi, yes, Montana. It sounds like we're quite similar to Idaho as well as Colorado, which is exciting that I hear about all this conjunctive management. I was at a seminar in Utah for the National Groundwater Association a few years ago, and it sounds like other states are not necessarily as far advanced as we are. So this is good to hear. But in 2007, we had a lawsuit, and the state then reinforced the conjunctive management of groundwater and surface water as one single resource. And so therefore, in all permitting decisions, we do treat surface water and groundwater as one resource. So essentially, in terms of how the analysis is done, we do very similar analysis to what it sounds like Colorado is doing. So any groundwater withdrawal is considered to be a depletion to surface water. So we do what's called a stream depletion analysis for all of our groundwater applications. Now, this can become very important because we do have a lot of closed basins to surface water. So essentially, if it's close to surface water, then it is likely becomes as close to any new groundwater appropriations without what we don't call it augmentation, we call it mitigation. So it's the applicant's burden then to come up with mitigation for that groundwater withdrawal. And we also do a similar analysis where we look at stream depletion of that groundwater withdrawal with that lag time, and we do it on a monthly basis. So our hydrogeologists here in the Water Management Bureau will do that analysis, and it's based off of a monthly basis. So you have to have mitigation water going to the area of effective stream depletion for that groundwater withdrawal for it to be permitted. And then of course that permitting process is then left open to any type of objections as well as part of our process. The exception for this are exempt wells, and that's kind of a hot topic in Montana, is anything that's less than 35 gallons per minute and does not exceed 10 acre feet a year is not subject to a permit. So that, that's definitely a loophole in our system. And, I'm not going to weigh in on which way, but it's just the way our statute is written in Montana.
Great. Thanks. And Mary?
Thank you for your patience while I unmuted. So Washington likewise has conjunctive management, although they didn't call it that in 1945 when our statute was amended. But our original water rights statute was 1917 and applied only to surface water. And then in 1945, the legislature added groundwater to our water code, and we've been managing it conjunctively ever since. And so we really feel fortunate that our legislature had the foresight to understand the hydrogeologic connection between surface and groundwater. Of course, what that means for us today has become much more complicated with population growth and new demands and climate change. So our program, it sounds very similar to what Brian was describing in Idaho. We have litigation really confining and controlling a lot of our decisions about how to conjunctively manage water. One of the threshold Washington State Supreme Court case is called the Postuma case. Really, it's very strict. It's any potential impact of a groundwater withdrawal on a surface water, closed surface water body, basically shift proof. The groundwater withdrawal must be proven to not have an impact on the surface water if it's a closed surface water body. So for us as a state agency trying to find water supply solutions, it has become more complicated. We are, though, as was described in the other states, exploring options such as the retiming of water using shallower aquifer recharge or managed aquifer recharge, so that we can address both the limitations of the court cases and the reality that we need an improvement in our water supply. I also noted that in Colorado, you mentioned the retiming around that interface. And so it's really good to hear from the other states that we're addressing some of these same issues.
Thank you. I'm going to share our next question. What efforts are your state undertaking to address statewide water planning? And more specifically, please describe the relationship between water quality and water quantity regulatory agencies in your state. I know some of you already mentioned this slightly, but if you could expand a little more, and we'll go ahead and stay with Mary and go in reverse order just to keep it consistent.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. So unlike many other states, Washington State does not have one comprehensive water management plan. Rather, we have 62 different watersheds. And in many of those watersheds, we have watershed-specific watershed plans or adopted in-stream flow rules for those watersheds. So we have a somewhat different approach. We actually received some assistance from AWRA in the past to compile a resource of all the other states' water plans, and we looked at that, but have not really had the resources or the momentum in our state to adopt one comprehensive water plan. So what does that mean for us in terms of the interface of water rights and water quality? It really remains up to us within the Department of Ecology to work with our sister program within our agency. We actually have more than one. We have a water quality program where we coordinate with them to ensure that we're looking at the meeting of water quality standards while also meeting in-stream flow requirements and managing the groundwater. We're very much in coordination with them in regard to groundwater injection wells, for example. And in instances where there has been contamination of groundwater, the water quality program has looked to us to help find solutions for alternative water supplies. We have yet another program inside our agency called the Shoreline program, and they really look at the adjacent land use interface, riparian corridors, for example, and they coordinate with a different state agency that's responsible for land use planning. So we begin to reach out to other agencies in the state around land use planning and how that affects our ability to coordinate water quality and water quantity to protect stream flow. It's one of numerous aspects, but I think that's the most pertinent to today's conversation.
Great, thank you. And Melissa?
Sure, it sounds quite similar to Washington. So Montana, as I mentioned before, we do have water quantity and permitting and water rights is associated with the DNRC. And then water quality is managed by our Montana Department of Environmental Quality. The Montana DEQ does have primacy over their water quality standards and does their own NPDES permitting. And then we also then at the DNRC, we manage then the quantity of the water in Montana, and the water is owned by the state of Montana and permitted out to the water users. We have a 2015 state water plan, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but it does recommend our continued coordination with our sister agencies. So we do have everything we do, I would say, in DNRC is in coordination with our other sister partners agencies. And FWP, we're constantly working with them with in-stream flow rights, DEQ on water quality issues. We also have our water planners work with on the local front. That's with such a large state and such limited resources, we have to work with these local organizations or community-based organizations that are actually focusing on their individual water resource issues within their watersheds. We have 60 locally based nonprofit watershed groups and 58 conservation districts that are scattered across the state. So it's the DNRC's job to help kind of add a framework for these organizations, as well as provide a direct, connection and to kind of make it happen and be there and help these local groups out, because that's how, moving forward in terms of water resource planning, that's how we get things done on the ground, is these within coordination with these local watershed groups and conservation districts.
Great, thanks. Tracy?
Thanks. Yes, in Colorado, water quality is primarily managed by the state health department, and there's not a whole lot of overlap with the other water agencies. We do meet on a quarterly basis to coordinate on those aspects that we need to coordinate on. But other than that, there's a pretty well-defined separation between quality and quantity water administration in Colorado.
And Brian?
Yeah, Idaho takes a very similar approach to Colorado on this topic. There is something of a bright dividing line between water resources programs and water quality programs. The water quality programs are housed within the State Department of Environmental Quality, and they are moving forward with establishing, taking over the NPDES permitting process in Idaho. So that's been a big effort for them over the past couple of years and will be for the next several. There are some areas of overlap as the state through the Water Resource Board has been moving forward to establish large-scale aquifer recharge programs in various aquifers. Obviously we don't want to do anything to impact water quality, and water quality monitoring is a huge issue with aquifer recharge programs. But and a few other things. Actually, the Department of Water Resources manages the underground injection well control program. Where many other states that perhaps is housed within the DEQ. But other than those, there isn't a lot of overlap between the two programs.
Yeah, we started to design these questions, myself along with other AWRA representatives, as we had these conversations, and found, despite largely being in similar geographic areas and having the same doctrine, we found that there were quite a few little differences and nuances between our states. So hopefully as we go a little bit further, we'll find a little bit more differences and where we can compare and contrast styles and structures. So my next question, I'll keep it with you, Brian. I will share my screen again, sorry. Does your state have a statewide water plan, and where in the process is your state with adopting a plan, if at all? Go ahead.
Sure. Great question. Yes, Idaho has a state water plan. That is, in fact, one of the responsibilities of the Idaho Water Resource Board. The current iteration of the state water plan was adopted back in 2012. So it is something that's on the board's radar to take a look at over the next couple of years. They've just been involved with some other things that have taken their attention over the past several years. The process involves the board taking a look at what they currently have as far as the state water plan, figuring out what needs to be updated, what changes need to be made. There will need to be some substantial changes made in the next update because of some of the settlement agreements and other changes that have taken place, primarily around the Eastern Snake Plain Aquifer, maybe the Treasure Valley Aquifer, and some other places around the state. And then ultimately the board would adopt a new version of the state water plan that does require legislative approval. And the legislature has a certain process that they have to follow to approve the state water plan as well. So that's a fairly involved and time-consuming process. Although the state water plan does have some very specific and very unique parameters surrounding it. In fact, it lays out how we manage the Snake River, which is our major river system in the state of Idaho. So there's a high degree of importance placed on the state water plan in Idaho.
Tracy, same question.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, Colorado also has a Colorado water plan, and this was adopted for the first time about 5 years ago. And I just want to give a lot of credit to our sister agency, the Colorado Water Conservation Board. This was a really major effort by the Water Conservation Board and continues to be. And Colorado has a lot of pride in this document and what the Colorado Water Conservation Board was able to do. this document sets out goals for Colorado's water future. The staff of the Water Conservation Board had a lot of public engagement and input in the development of this plan. It includes basin implementation plans from each of our 7 water basins here in Colorado. And so just something that we have a lot of pride in. In 2019, the Water Conservation Board came up with what they call the technical update to the water plan. And then in about 2 years, I believe they are scheduled to come up with a full update to the water plan. So it's really, there's an entire section of the Water Conservation Board that's constantly working on this water plan and new updates to it, whether it be the technical basis or planning for the future.
Thank you. Melissa?
Hi, yes, Montana, we do have a state water plan. It's the 2015 state water plan. It's in statute, so it's mandated that we update the state water plan every 20 years. And just like Colorado, the water plan also has goals and recommendations. It has 5-year goals and then longer term goals and recommendations. And that's kind of what mandates what we do in the Water Management Bureau. And my bureau is responsible for the state water plan, and we work in coordination with basically the entire division and the agency in the state of Montana, working with basin advisory councils to create the state water plan. And I did not work on the state water plan, but those in my bureau that actually worked on the state water plan in 5 years leading up to 2015 would state that it was quite the effort and to put it together. And it is quite the document. So it is available if anybody wants to see it on our DNRC website. And there is an executive summary if you don't want to go through the entire giant state water plan, but it's pretty impressive. So hopefully I'll be around in 2030 to work on the next one.
Mary?
Well, I have to laugh about that cycle of planning. Yeah, it is a recurring cycle. I appreciate the work associated with that. Stephen, I addressed a little bit about Washington's situation in my answer to the previous question. We do not have a comprehensive statewide water plan. However, we have 2 important planning processes in play right now in our state. One is a watershed by watershed approach to planning for the impacts of permit exempt wells. And we have permit exemptions in our state specifically for domestic uses, small commercial uses, and livestock watering. So we were directed by the legislature in 2018 to go into specific watersheds and develop plans to address the impacts of the domestic permit exempt wells. This is coming to a conclusion in just a few weeks after this session is being recorded. Also, we have just completed an assessment of where we should conduct the next adjudications of water rights in our state. And as we're recording this, the legislature is considering a request for funding to proceed with the adjudication of water rights in 2 basins in our state. Those are the basins where we've had the most controversy around the lack of clarity on who has the priority water right in the basin. So we're hopeful that we will get the funding that we need to proceed with adjudications. And the adjudication in those 2 instances really does become the water management plan, because we'll have clarity on who has the water rights and then be able to proceed to manage them according to their priority system.
Great. I almost combined this into the last question, but we'll keep it with Mary. And you all talked about the different aspects of planning and next updates to those water plans. To what degree are you incorporating climate change or forecasting into your water supply planning?
Yeah, excellent question. And for us, the need for addressing climate change and water supply planning has allowed us to collaborate with new partners at a greater level. So we are engaged, for example, in the Western States Water Council's water data exchange program in pretty high level of detail. And recently supported additional funding for NASA for their open ET, because what we really need is better technology tools and better science to be able to manage water supply at a finer scale than we needed to in the past. So we're adapting new technology, new water supply tracking, in addition, of course, to the classics of snow-tell stations and in-stream flow gauges. With that, we have only one position in our entire program. We're a small program, like the others probably, with a lot of responsibility and few resources. We have one person designated in our program to be our water supply availability tracker and analyst, and to advise us on a season-by-season basis, especially when we're facing drought conditions and when the supply availability triggers curtailment of junior users. So, so that's how we're sort of approaching water supply availability at this point. As far as adaptation to climate change, we have not taken steps yet, but we're evaluating steps of how to incorporate climate change projections into our water supply permitting program. So for a water right permit that is issued essentially into perpetuity until it's perfected and certificated, we're considering adding reopeners in the event that climate change changes the evaluation of the availability of water to issue that permit. So not there yet, but we're actively engaged in the conversation.
Great, thank you. Melissa, same question.
Sure. So along with our state water plan, DNRC, the Water Management Bureau, is updating the Montana Drought Management Plan. And as part of this, we will be assessing the risks to our critical resources, specifically considering a range of future predicted drought and hydrologic conditions, looking at uncertainties related to climate change. We also incorporate anticipated trends in land use change. We're seeing a lot of land use change in Montana, as well as increased population growth, especially this past year. We will rely heavily on Montana climate assessment. As Mary mentioned, we've been able to expand out with our partnerships. We've been working a lot with the Montana Climate Office to help develop this plan. This will help us understand what type of assets and resources are at the highest level of risk and help us prioritize how we're going to mitigate and adaptation strategies. And this is great, but this all has to be done on a local level. And we need to work with the producers. Montana's an ag state. So we work with the irrigation districts to help them better manage water resources in the face of climate change. And within these conversations, we don't necessarily use the word climatic change. That's not, it's more in the sense of drought. We use the word drought, although one has to, kind of wonder if we've been in a state of drought at some point over the last 10 years. Is that really drought or is that actually climate? So, so we have to look at the word climate change. But with our producers, these discussions are happening on the local level. And within the DNRC, we are also getting out there and doing the science. So we're getting in these small basins, doing small basin studies. We have one that's starting up in the Upper Yellowstone, and everybody's pretty familiar with the Upper Yellowstone River. Not too long ago, there was a fish kill, and that was due to high temperatures, as well as low water conditions and some biology within the fish as well caused that fish kill. But it did concern, it's very concerning for an area that is reliant on fisheries and that type of resource. And there's a lot of ag producers in that valley as well. So we're working with them to develop a water balance. We're trying to utilize better technology as well. Getting mesonet stations or weather stations in better locations across the state so we can do forecasting. We've also been using remote sensing as well as OpenET to develop a statewide evapotranspiration map that does hone in on what aggregated agricultural lands and water consumption. It is an unknown in the state. Water measurement isn't exactly something that Montana has done traditionally in the past. We don't have a lot of enforcement basins. So getting in there and doing these small basin studies to actually have a water balance and to know what the water usage is helpful to these basins and these watershed groups so that they can actually do their drought planning and help them. We're developing a forecasting tool for these smaller basins that will can be used for them for their drought management scenarios. And that is it. There we go.
Mary commented that she wanted to add a quick note, so I'll let her add to her response, then we'll go to Tracy.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. Sorry to butt in, Tracy, but something that Melissa mentioned caused me to also want to acknowledge that in Washington State, the large irrigators are also a resource for us. Of course, we're the regulatory agency, but they have a tremendous interest in conserving water and in close tracking of their actual usage. So they have been introducing us to some of the technologies that they are using and asking us to reconsider our old and rather outdated Washington irrigation guide and go to a more refined crop duty approach, especially in the big Columbia Basin, which is our area of really large irrigators with multiple thousands of acres, similar to what you have in the other large Western states.
Great, thanks, Mary. Tracy?
Thanks, Stephen. In Colorado, we have a very extensive drought plan that we follow. And I guess I'd like to really separate drought from climate change, at least in the way that I think the state agencies of Colorado look at it, where drought is maybe season to season, year to year, whereas climate change, we're looking at impacts, decades out into the future. So I'll separate them in the way that I talk about them. And again, we have a drought plan that we follow. It's quite extensive. The drought plan calls for various task forces. There's one task force that meets just ongoing year in, year out, and then other task forces that are only activated when we're actively in a drought, and the governor is going to recommend activation of task forces, usually around sectors when our municipalities, our municipal water providers are seeing impacts due to a drought. We activate our municipal impact task force, but when we are having times of wet weather, we're not in an active drought situation, then those task forces aren't going to be meeting. The task force that meets on a regular month-to-month basis, we call the Water Availability Task Force. And we welcome water users to attend that, and we focus a lot on reports from our state climatologists talking about current conditions and short-term forecasts for the next 3 to 6 months in terms of what we're expecting for precipitation and temperature. If we're in a La Nina, El Nino, we're looking at those kinds of things month to month. We also get a report from the NRCS Snow Survey Group in Colorado, and they're going to report a lot about what their SNOTEL stations are reporting and what their stream flow forecasting is showing for the upcoming irrigation season. So we do have a lot of regular coordination around water supply conditions month to month and season to season. In terms of climate change and planning, again, I need to really give a lot of credit to what the Colorado Conservation Board is doing. They, for their water plan, they use scenario planning, and I had to look up exactly how they're doing this, and I hope I can report it correctly. I'll apologize to my CWCB colleagues if I get anything a little bit wrong, but they're using scenario planning. And for the latest version of the water plan, they're looking at 5 plausible future scenarios. One of their scenarios is called hot growth. And so that would include higher rates of climate change and greater municipal and industrial water demands. And so that would be a future scenario that puts a lot of stress on our water availability. And so in their long range planning, CWCB is looking at a growth scenario along with other scenarios that would not put as much climate stress on our water system.
And Brian?
Yes, that's a huge issue in Idaho, in fact. Similar to Colorado, we do separate out short-term responses, versus long-range planning. During drought years, we have a water supply committee that meets and implements some drought response measures. Very similar to what Tracy just talked about in Colorado. As far as long-range planning, as Idaho is an agricultural state, and we're extremely dependent on winter snowpack accumulation. Any potential change to that winter snowpack accumulation has the potential to have significant impacts to water supplies and how we use water. Most of the projections that we're seeing as far as climate change forecasting, being as we're situated kind of where the Pacific Northwest meets the Northern Rockies, most of those long-range projections indicate that we would still get roughly the same amount of precipitation, but more and more of it would come as winter rain rather than winter snowpack. So what that in effect does is it means that we're losing part of the reservoir that is provided by our winter snowpack. Okay, so think about the snowpack. It falls as snow. It sits up on top of the mountains until spring, and then melts into the summer. And effectively provides a reservoir of water, and our water management systems in our various river basins are built around that. If we lose part of that, and the precipitation comes as rain instead of snow that sits up on top of the mountains, then we have to build more water storage capacity just to stay even with where we're at. That's before we even talk about things like growth we're seeing in some parts of the state, and trying to manage groundwater and surface water conjunctively, and the water needs that may bring to the table. So yes, that's a huge issue in Idaho. Similar to Montana, we need to be a little careful about how we talk about it and the terminology that we use. But it's a huge issue that we are spending a lot of time thinking about.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think due to time constraints, this is going to be our last question. You guys have all iterated a number of challenges that you're already taking on, but if you could think of what are the largest challenges facing water resource management in your state, and then are there any specific examples to your state of opportunities to solve these problems, or examples where we can learn from one another in overcoming these challenges? Brian, I'll leave it with you to finish up.
Okay. Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about that one. Undoubtedly, the largest challenge that Idaho is facing and has faced and will face is the interconnection between surface water and groundwater. And it's an issue that isn't going to go away, and I think it's going to be the biggest issue in Idaho water management in the 21st century. As far as, are there opportunities for solutions? Probably the biggest one that I can think of, and I have a whole other presentation surrounding this if folks are interested in seeing that at some point, is the situation on what we call the Eastern Snake Plain Aquifer and the Snake River, where we had the Eastern Snake Plain Aquifer supplies roughly 1 million acres of groundwater pumping, along with the cities and industry located on that plain as well. And that's generally junior priority groundwater pumping. The aquifer had been dropping since the 1950s. And as the aquifer drops, that impacts spring flows and reach gains back to the Snake River at various locations, including both from a series of commercial fish hatcheries located in what we call the Magic Valley, which is the largest concentration of commercial trout producers in the world, as well as irrigators up and down the Snake River, irrigation districts, canal companies up and down the Snake River that had seen their water supplies impacted by that reduction in reach gains. And so the groundwater pumpers were facing numerous delivery calls, conjunctive administration delivery calls over, a 2-decade span. Some estimates had upwards of $100 million in litigation costs being spent by the various parties. Ultimately, and that had been handled on sort of a year-to-year basis with mitigation plans, similar to what Tracy talked about as augmentation plans. Ultimately, based on some court decisions that changed how the director was to implement those, brought the groundwater users to the table seeking a permanent solution. And what ultimately emerged is kind of a joint partnership between the groundwater users and the state of Idaho in terms of implementing a aquifer management program that involved reductions by the groundwater users to the tune of hundreds of thousands of acre feet per year. At the same time, an aquifer recharge program by the state, also of hundreds of thousands of acre feet of water per year. Using water that would otherwise flow down the Snake River and out to the ocean. So I think that's a very successful story, but we had to go through 2 decades of litigation to set the stage for the parties being willing to come to the table. But it's I think a big success story that we're pretty proud of and happy to talk about.
Thank you. Tracy?
Oh, thank you. I thought I would start just with some of the challenges of the Division of Water Resources and then talk about more broadly water challenges for the whole state. So I think for DWR in our charge where we're primarily administrating the use of water, we have been dealing with increasing complexity as we continue to have more augmentation plans get decreed in the water courts, more water rights, more recharge, more complex administration of water where it's not simply a surface diversion of water, but diversions and replacements where you're also doing a calculation about timing. And so just the amount of complexity and data that we're trying to deal with at the same time as administering who can legally take water at what time, where, and when. It's definitely a big challenge for us. The way that we've dealt with it, because we're not getting more resources in terms of people, is with technological advancements. We're doing our best to stay on top of it. So we're using things like remote sensing. We're using telemetry. So basically a person does not need to be at a headgate diversion structure in order to measure the amount of water that's going through it. Using cellular and satellite technology to report those water diversions directly to the database. We are developing tools at the Division of Water Resources, like an app on our field personnel's phones where they can just enter information directly while they're standing on a stream bank, and also tools where water users can upload their data provisionally into our database. So that's how we've been trying to stay on top of that. In terms of the state as a whole and the broader water concerns, I would guess this is like the other states that are on this meeting as well, is that we're dealing with a lot of challenges as we look at population growth, climate change, wildfire, forest health, funding, a need for funding for water projects, compliance with interstate compacts in the state, compliance with compacts, while we're also looking at the stressors of climate change and population growth. So these are all really big concerns for the state of Colorado. And I think, the solutions to them are definitely going to be complex. And I'm really happy that the Colorado Water Plan is looking at all of these elements in a really holistic way. And I think another part of the solution that I know the Colorado Water Conservation Board also recognizes is that collaboration and dialogue among water users both in Colorado and our neighboring states where we have compacts is going to be a big part of whatever solution we come up with.
Great, thank you. Melissa?
Gotta say, I love going third because I get to hear Idaho and, and Colorado. I'm like, oh yeah, we do that too. So you guys make it easier. But I'm going to take the same format as Tracy and talk about issues just within the department and then take it out into Montana. So same here, DNRC, we are having an increased complexity in our permitting process. And it's we're not getting more resources, but we're getting more permits. And again, we're trying to use technology to deal with that situation. We are currently updating our water rights database system, and the division is now looking at a water rights overhaul, how we can increase efficiencies within our water rights process. And we'll be holding stakeholder meetings this year to look at that. Montana, broadly, looking into the future, I mean, we're a headwater state. You know, we are entirely dependent on water delivery from, you know, we're not entirely dependent on water delivery from other states. So it's within the state. So the precipitation that falls within our borders. The western half of the state relies on snowpack, and the eastern part divided, the state is divided, and the eastern part is very prairie, and it counts on summer rainfall. So climate change is creating a lot of uncertainty in the amount and the timing of our annual water delivery. But at the same time, we have increased temperatures, which mean we're getting earlier snowmelt and longer growing seasons, which is becoming an issue for our irrigators. And in some areas, we may see additional precipitation. So some areas are in drought, and other areas we're having flooding issues. And you know, we're seeing longer summers and hotter summers, although it does seem like in Montana, our winters are still 9 months. So I don't know how that happens, but, but this year we had a very mild winter. It was a great place to be a transplant into Montana, because you would think that our winters are always that mild, but they're not. Many basins are rapidly developing, such as the Missouri Headwaters region, and they're closed. They're now closed to new surface water or groundwater appropriations, which means that the current water allocations already exceed the amount of annual rainfall that we receive, that we get in those basins. And the land use changes, such as converting irrigated fields to housing developments, can have a profound effect on the hydrology. We're no longer in the Billings area, we're changing to suburban developments, and we're no longer have the canals running with irrigation water. So what was once a shallow aquifer recharge system where all these wells were originally drilled are now going dry, or they're decreasing in water elevation, and you're seeing a lot of nitrates in the groundwater, where once upon a time you had all that fresh water flushing through during irrigation season and providing nice fresh water for these wells. So that is definitely an issue in Montana. So population growth and then climatic change are huge for us right now. In terms of water quality, non-point source solution is a huge issue. We still have communities that are not on central drain fields. So septics, getting into our lakes, algal blooms, algae in the rivers, huge issues. Increasing temperatures, just a great place for all that to grow. Some specific examples and opportunities that we can solve these problems. Data would be really great in a state with limited resources and not necessarily getting more resources to gather data. We are definitely expanding with technology. So we're heavily looking at remote sensing technology. Water measurement would be fantastic in terms of irrigation. So we can actually have basin accounting for all of our water irrigation and our groundwater withdrawals to actually know what consumption really is in those basins. We do have a state stream gauge program. DNRC does have a state stream gauge program. We are expanding that program. So continual funding for that state stream gauge program to get an accounting of, say, smaller drainages. We also support the USGS gauges that are in Montana. So continual funding for those USGS gauges on those smaller or those larger tributaries. We're also looking at exploring hybridization of irrigation in terms of flood pivot. Could there be the potential for shallow aquifer recharge? For instance, a producer that's on a floodplain, can they allow the river to potentially flood during the early part of the season and then maybe a different part pivot irrigation? So allowing that late season return flow from flood irrigation that will help the in-stream flow rights or the fisheries. And then also funding, getting these smaller communities on central drain fields to help with the nutrients that are in our lakes and rivers.
Thank you. Mary, do you want to wrap us up?
Yes, I agree that following my colleagues is very intellectually stimulating here, because there's so much that we have that overlaps or that I can learn from all of you. So I appreciate the conversation. I would say that one of our largest challenges in Washington, like the other states, we have many, is that we have not yet had an opportunity to develop a comprehensive and cohesive policy framework for water management. So we find ourselves kind of whipsawed around on the policy issue of the day. I mentioned earlier that we've recently been involved in watershed planning around permit exempt wells, which are really minuscule in comparison for their water resource impact. The amount of water that's being used by the domestic permit exempt wells is not our biggest challenge. Our municipalities and our large irrigators are really our biggest uses of water. But the legislature was caught in a quandary, if you will. They had constituents who were really barking loudly about the need to address the permit exempt wells. And so then our work plan was reprioritized to address permit exempt wells and associated planning and rulemaking. This year, there's a big concern. It's a valid concern. There's a big concern in the legislature around private water banking. So it's all a system of allocation, reallocation, and a priority doctrine like we have. So our legislators are concerned about private entities buying water rights and banking them for a profit, and therefore competing with other uses, including all of the public needs for water. So I would say in summary that we certainly know that climate change is a huge issue, and we're worried about being able to maintain the snowpack dependent water supplies. And resources are always an issue. Relationships are always an issue. We have 29 federally recognized Indian tribes who also want their water rights to be addressed, whether they're adjudicated or not. But laying over all of that, I believe that one of our biggest challenges is that we don't yet have a comprehensive policy framework for how we're going to reconcile all those competing demands.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for all those answers, all our panelists. I wish I could give you a resounding round of applause, but you'll have to take my word that everybody viewing this is cheering wildly for you. I want to say just a tremendous thank you to each one of our panelists for participating today and for sharing your wisdom and knowledge and experience with us all. And thank you also to the different chapters of AWRA and our partners with Colorado Groundwater Association that brought these individuals to the table so we can all learn from each other. And I found it rather profound that just when I asked what the biggest challenges facing your state with water resource management, nobody mentioned COVID, which is hopefully a good sign. And I think it's telling that these water resource problems that we're all trying to tackle persist in and out of a pandemic. And I'm grateful to have everybody here that's joining this conversation and watching it, working to solve those problems amidst difficult circumstances that brought us all together today as well. So with that being said, thank you so much, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone, that was great.